When we think of obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, it's not uncommon for us to think of intrusions relating to excessive cleanliness and orderliness, or of being plagued by unwanted thoughts of harm, morality, or sexuality. But another form of OCD is not as commonly discussed, but can be equally as distressing. We call this false memory OCD. False memory OCD is a subtype of OCD in which we become obsessed with the possibility that we've done something wrong in the past. And this obsession involves the repeated checking of memories to see if we've done something wrong. This process then leads to more doubt and the confabulation of false memories in the process. The condition becomes distressing and negatively affects mental health because of the anxiety and other emotions that it provokes, and because of the negative impact it can have on functioning overall, which impacts negatively on people's lives. In this video, I'm going to tell you just what false memory OCD is and how we can overcome it using cognitive behavioural therapy and exposure and response prevention techniques. So, what is false memory OCD? OCD is a disorder in which our responses to intrusive thoughts lead to emotional distress, and sets of compulsive behaviours which include checking, rituals, mental neutralising and thought suppression. And we adopt these compulsions both to reduce our feelings of distress and to reduce the risk of our OCD intrusions becoming reality. Now, we know that intrusive thoughts are common in both people with clinically diagnosed OCD and in people without a mental health diagnosis. The point at which intrusive thoughts lead to a disorder is when the emotional impact that they cause and the negative impact that the compulsions have on our lives reach a point where it is difficult for us to function. In the case of false memory OCD, it occurs when we experience an intrusive thought. For instance, did I just run over someone with my car? And rather than just dismissing it, we become anxious about the possibility that it had actually happened. The difficulty with just dismissing a thought in OCD is because people with OCD can tend to both overestimate their sense of responsibility and catastrophize the outcome of feared events. This elevated sense of responsibility and the fear of catastrophic outcomes combine to make the false memory OCD person experience anxiety, struggle with memory confidence, and then take whatever action they can to find out whether the event actually happened or not. And the key compulsions that false memory OCD sufferers may find themselves doing can be split into two categories. We've got overt, which is the stuff that we can see, and covert, which is all the stuff that goes on in our heads. So overt compulsions may include getting reassurance from other people that the event didn't happen, revisiting the place where we think it occurred, and checking Google or news reports to find out whether they say anything about the supposed event. Covert compulsions include mental review of memories relating to the false event, reassuring ourselves that we would never let that sort of event happen, or trying to suppress the thought entirely. The problem with these particular overt and covert compulsions is that we then become reliant on them as a way of coping with the intrusive thoughts, the related distress, and the OCD symptoms. We never get to find out what would happen if we don't, for example, check our memory when we do have the intrusive thoughts, doubts, etc. So in the earlier example of false memory OCD, I've used the intrusion of having run someone over. But false memory OCD can fix itself on a number of other different themes. So it's not just about being a road traffic accident, okay? Some people may also worry that they attacked someone physically or sexually, while others may be concerned about having said the wrong thing, causing offence, or having acted inappropriately. And a key feature is how much time is spent trying to disconfirm the intrusion through revisiting memory. What are the causes of false memory OCD? Traditional models of mental health problems have viewed mental distress as being largely a biological problem, typically around the idea that there is something wrong with our brains that causes the problem, so a chemical imbalance or something similar. Now, more up-to-date understandings of mental health problems adopt what we call a biopsychosocial model. And this means that we acknowledge the biological aspect, but we also recognise the psychological aspects, thoughts, behaviours and emotions, and the social factors which contribute to a problem. False memory OCD is no different in this. Sensitivity to anxiety is in part influenced by genetic factors, so biological aspects. Some of us are simply more anxious than others, but it does require certain environmental factors and life events to influence anxiety into becoming problematic and becoming OCD. So early life events which reinforce a heightened sense of responsibility can be a factor for developing OCD and false memory OCD, along with witnessing parents who struggle with anxiety or mental health issues. And the important thing to remember is, however, that we all get intrusive thoughts of some description. And it's the meaning that we attribute to these which is influenced by earlier life experiences, which influences whether we develop false memory OCD or not. So why revisiting memories and false memory OCD doesn't help? There are two main reasons why obsessively trying to work out whether a memory is real or not is not helpful in OCD and false memories. So first, memory in its very nature is incomplete and it's often very unreliable. So whenever we try to remember something, there are absolutely going to be gaps, there are going to be new recollections that might come up, or we just simply might misremember. And because there is no memory of the intrusive event actually occurring, and when we revisit memory, the fact that there are natural gaps in our memory will provoke anxiety, as we might believe that it was in these gaps that the event occurred. So we will misinterpret the gap as evidence that something may have happened, rather than, more realistically, and not acknowledging the fact that gaps are natural and that we tend to remember important events anyway. Yeah. So this means if we are likely to remember significant events in our life anyway. Okay, so it's kind of a misappraisal really about what's happening and how we interpret gaps in Natri as being something significant that we kind of need to work out exactly what, whether that significant event happened there. The second problem with revisiting memory is that we may increase the likelihood of confabulating a false memory entirely. Confabulation is when we create ideas, narratives, or justifications for past events or actions, and it's actually a feature of human brain function. If we are entertaining an intrusion that we may have done something wrong in the past, our mind may connect unrelated patches of memory to create the illusion that the feared event actually did happen. So as we arrive at this confabulated conclusion, we may then feel more anxious and continue searching through memory to confirm or disconfirm this false memory or this false representation. And then we continue with this pattern of similar compulsions which impact on our functioning. So how to recover from false memory OCD using cognitive behavioural therapy? Cognitive behavioural therapy is a type of psychotherapy that has been shown to be an effective treatment for many disorders, including OCD. OCD treatments with CBT have two main components. We've got exposure and response prevention, and then we've got a cognitive restructuring aspect. Exposure and response prevention has its roots in behavioural psychology and argues that through repeated exposure to feared stimuli, intrusions, appraisals of intrusions, triggers for intrusions and avoided emotions, the body will learn that the stimuli is not intrinsically harmful and will, over a period of time, start to reduce that threat response, that anxiety response. The response prevention bit in ERP is all about dropping our compulsions, both the overt and covert, as we engage in the exposure. Our compulsions, rituals, responses give us very short-term relief in relation to our intrusions, which is why they keep on going. So for example, we may get very short-term relief from reviewing memory and reassuring ourselves that the feared intrusion did not actually occur. However, we can become so reliant on using our intrusions to get this relief that we spend more and more of our time engaged in them, rather than finding out what would happen if we just exposed ourselves to that fear. So cognitive behavioural therapy is a very active type of psychotherapy. We don't just talk about the problem. It's a type of therapy in which you and a therapist work together collaboratively to treat that OCD. And the first step in overcoming false memory OCD is just to get a better understanding of how the condition actually works. And we typically do this through a process called formulation. So you will work with your therapist to define the links between the intrusions, the meaning that we attribute to them, and then how the compulsions and emotions that arise from them all relate. Next, we would then focus on tracking your intrusions, the negative emotions that arise from them, and the compulsions, including revisiting memory that follow. And it's this symptom tracking bit which is really important because it helps us then to become more aware of the nature of the intrusions and compulsions, making them a lot less automatic and habitual and a lot more amenable and available to our interventions. And based on this information that you collect, we would then generate a series of exposure and response prevention exercises and behavioural experiments, which will then form the bulk of the rest of the treatment. We're in the business there of creating behavioural experiments to modify our appraisals of what it means to actually have an intrusive thought like that. Does it mean that actually that intrusive thought is something that has happened? And does it mean that, our feared consequence, the police are going to knock on the door, they're going to, arrest me and my life will be over? We can actually create experiments of what happens when we sit with that thought, and we sit with that deeper core belief and see if we can actually change our relationship to those thoughts to recognize that they are simply just thoughts and are different to the reality itself. So in conclusion, false memory OCD is a challenging form of obsessive compulsive disorder that can cause a great deal of distress. And it's important to note that false memory OCD is treatable using cognitive behavioural strategies. So if you're interested in learning more about false memory OCD and CBT treatment, you can get in touch with me here at accesscbt.co.uk, or you can watch more of these videos around OCD and other mental health issues. Leave some comments, follow the video, whatever it is that you want to do, and I'll be happy to help. Thank you very much for listening to this video or watching this video. See you soon.